it's such a difficult and fast-paced and ever-evolving place that we're living in right now. And actually, when you translate that into business, it's usually HR that feel the brunt of that. They are either the ones that are being told, hey, go and be the change maker, go and be the innovator, go and help everyone else through this change. But what about HR? Like, who's looking after HR to help them through all of that themselves?
Hello and welcome to the Plumm Pod, where we talk about all things HR and mental health. I'm your host, Georgia, and founder of Access HR. In today's episode, I'm joined by Chris Britton, and we focus on the 5 trends in 2025 and how you can build better habits as a professional in preparation. Chris, hello.
Hello.
Hello. Thank you so much for joining me on today's episode.
It's my pleasure. Thank you for having me.
I have been wanting to speak to you for a while. I've seen a lot of your content, especially in the appreciation scene. And today we're actually going to do things a little bit differently, which I'm really excited for. So first, though, I want to take it back a little bit so that our listeners can really get to understand more about you and your journey.
Sure.
And there's a question I ask every single guest,
Okay.
and that is, was HR part of the plan or did it happen by chance?
I'd be curious to understand what everyone else says, because I don't think I've ever met an HR person that says, growing up, I wanted to be an HR person. Most people, I think, fall into it accidentally. My journey was no different. And when I grew up, I actually wanted to be one of 2 things. When I wanted to be a wrestler, obviously that didn't work out. Or I wanted to be a bird. That's when I was very young, because I just wanted to fly. I followed kind of just the university route in Brighton, where I went to university, fell into a job just kind of funding my student lifestyle selling phones, a Vodafone back in the day. And then from that, an opportunity came up as a secondment in learning and development, or learning and talent, I think it was called at the time, as a retail trainer. And that was my first foray into the behind the scenes of business life. I just never looked back, really. So it kind of just went from L&D role into L&D role. And then it's really over the last sort of 5 or 6 years that's transitioned more into what we call people experience, which is a much broader remit. But yeah, in short, had absolutely no idea or aspirations of what HR was, fell into it, but now it's a passion, as I'm sure it is for most HR professionals.
And looking back then, starting with Vodafone, selling phones, to where we are now, You're absolutely right. Not a single guest has said, I grew up wanting to be in HR.
Just love reward. Yeah.
I'd love reward. This is what I want to do in my career. Maybe one day we'll have a guest.
Absolutely.
But
We can
so
inspire
far,
some people.
we could always hope. On today's episode, we are going to unpack the 5 trends of 2025, leaning on your experience as people experience director at Reward Gateway. We're going to talk about those trends, what we should keep on our radar, what's really important for us as HR professionals. With your experience, of course, you oversee a lot of the employee life cycle.
Yeah.
Let's talk about the first priority, and that's prioritization.
Yeah, good place to start. Where do we prioritize the trends list? We'll start with prioritization. I think the way you've described that as being a priority in this world that we're in right now is so important, because I've lost track of the amount of people I've spoken to in the people profession that talk about being under stress, being asked to do more with less, tighter budgets, fewer people to help them, bigger demands, all that sort of stuff. I mean, that's just in the UK. If you kind of multiply that across the Western world, actually the world more broadly, it's such a difficult and fast-paced and ever-evolving place that we're living in right now. And actually, when you translate that into business, it's usually HR that feel the brunt of that. They are either the ones that are being told, hey, go and be the change maker, go and be the innovator, go and help everyone else through this change. But what about HR? Like, who's looking after HR to help them through all of that themselves? And what I think is a real symptom of HR professionals down the years, and I include myself in this, and I don't know if you've ever been in this situation yourself, is we want to help people. So we want to do the right thing for our people and for the business. So we just keep saying, yes, yeah, I can do that, I can do that, I can do that. And actually, it gets to a tipping point, which I think a lot of HR people are in right now, where it's unsustainable and it's unhealthy. And so I very much talk about this idea of it's unreasonable to say we've got to do more with less. That's just not a fair thing to do for any profession, but particularly in the HR profession. So I'm very much in this mindset of let's do less with less
Mhm.
and make it count. So the stuff you're working on adds the biggest value. I mean, have you experienced that yourself in terms of
I
lots and lots and lots?
I definitely have, and I proudly call myself a recovering people pleaser. So I wasn't the people pleaser I was when I started in my career, but I am a people person. I completely agree. I say yes a lot because I'm so passionate about creating great places to work and great experiences. I really resonated then when you talked around shrinking budgets. As an HR profession, we are asked to do a lot of things with not a lot of scope with budget. I'm curious to know if, with your less is more approach and the shrinking of budgets, have you seen any changes that are quite significant that you could give me an example of?
Yeah, well, what I would say, I'll caveat all of this by saying I don't think great people practices need to necessarily be expensive.
Mhm.
So it's one of the things I learned this from my learning and development background is you can get creative. So if budgets are tight, if time is short, and your to-do list just never seems to be getting any smaller, you can be creative and do stuff on the cheap if necessary. And there might be a lot of people listening to this going, oh, how do we do that? And actually, one of the things I found works really well, and I see more and more businesses doing this, is ask your people what they actually want. And use your employee voice really succinctly and really cleverly to make sure the stuff you're focused on is the stuff that's going to add the biggest value for the least amount of money. And when you clarify that and you kind of speak to your people, it means that what you're adding and what you're delivering and what you're spending that limited budget on becomes worthwhile rather than just spending it on stuff and stuff that just appears everywhere and stuff that's all over the place. And I think that just leads to more openness, it leads to more transparency, it leads to more trust within businesses because actually what the people team is therefore doing is going out and saying, hey, look, and particularly if you're really open and transparent, and I see a lot of business and our clients do this a lot, at Reward Gateway is look, let's be honest with you, there's a limited amount of money in this benefits pot, or there's a limited amount of money in this, or there's a limited amount of time that we've got. So we can't do it all. So where do you want us to start? And let's get the majority and start there, and then roll it from that point on, rather than just going stuff, 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 stuff. It becomes stuff that people actually are asking for. And therefore it's much better use of the money that you've got, limited or otherwise.
And we were talking before actually around a one size fits all doesn't work.
Yeah.
And a lot of the time, the people strategy can be built from the feedback and the employee voice that we have from our internal team. I see a lot of businesses who are making the mistake of thinking, okay, this is the solution. Here is what I think they want. When really you could spend a lot of time and energy and money. And the reality is, if we actually listen to the voice of our people, we can then really understand what is a priority to them and ensuring that we are prioritizing with our strategies at the same time. Looking ahead for 2025, what is a priority that we think the HR function should really be focusing on?
So I think for this year, it's a little bit like riding out the storm because
Mhm.
particularly here in the UK, there is a storm and it's very stormy weather for a lot of
Brewing.
people. Yeah. And that's, as we're recording now, the national insurance stuff hasn't kicked in, but that's not too far away. Employment rights, bills changes. There's a lot of stuff happening around us, which is completely outside of our control. So I think we need to, as HR always does, we need to kind of almost batten down the hatches a little bit and ride this year out
Yeah.
and doing what we can, knowing, because a lot of people, particularly HR professionals, we are by nature quite resilient, right? And we've probably been here before, and we've probably experienced this type of thing before. And we always know the good times come back, and they will come back. It's inevitable. It always comes back. But when you're in it, it never feels that way. So I would say 2025 is a little bit of a, we know this is rocky. We know it's a stormy time. So get your house in order to make
Mhm.
sure it kind of stands up to that. Do what you need to do to keep your people as happy as possible for this year, knowing that it's just an inevitability that I'm saying this and maybe we'll come to 2026 and it'll be worse, but hopefully not. But hopefully when we get to the end of this year and into next year, things will feel brighter, feel better, more settled, and then we can kick on from this year.
2025 is such an interesting year. I completely agree. There's a lot of changes, and a lot of us feel busy.
Yeah.
Lots of questions, lots of strategy, and a lot of expectations as well as we are evolving as an HR function. Do you have any tips on being busy and wearing busy as a badge of honor to actually being more efficient as an HR professional?
Yeah, there's no point in being busy for busy's sake, right? If you're
Yeah.
working on stuff that isn't adding value to either your people or your bottom line, you've really got to question why you're doing it.
Mm.
If it is just one of those things you historically have always done, it's one of those time stealers that it's just always been in the diary, then now is the time to call that stuff out and question why, just because we've always done it this way, why are we still doing it this way? If, quite often, and I remember from years and years ago, kind of delivering time management sessions, back in my early L&D years of, hey, how do we get more time in the day? And one of the things I always talked about is for people to say, I'm too busy to do that. I can't do that. Or there's not enough hours in the day. The one thing that I'm always clear about is time is a constant.
Mm.
Time is never going to change. There is never going to be more hours in the day. So stop trying to change that bit. You've got to change your behavior around time. And that means being perhaps a little bit more deliberately selfish. So, how can you be the best for your business or outside of your business at your home life if you're not taking care of yourself? So be selfishly and deliberate in terms of managing your own time and sanity. But actually, if time is precious and your list is getting bigger and bigger and bigger, now's the time to challenge back into your business to say, we don't need to do that anymore, or let's pause that this year and come back to it next year and focus on the stuff that really matters.
And I think there's a confidence there as well as an HR professional and function to actually say, this is what we're going to prioritize in line with the business strategy. We need to start and focus a lot more. And as part of focusing, because there's so much that we're doing, it leads us on quite nicely to trend number 2
Yeah.
around appreciation.
Yeah.
And how do we support people during the tumultuous time of 2025?
Yeah.
And this is a topic that you talk about quite a lot in the space.
It is. And it's one of those things where it's no shock to any HR person, but it might come as a shock to some business leaders.
Yeah.
We're employing real human beings with real actual feelings and emotions. And we all know that within the people profession. I think it's more so in the last sort of few years that businesses are starting to go, oh yeah, you are a real human being and you are a real person with real emotion and feelings. And that's where this appreciation thing really comes into it. So what we talk about at Reward Gateway, and we conduct our own research into this as well, is it's not enough anymore just to see someone as an employee. You've got to see them as a human being first. And if you appreciate them for the human being they are, then they will be much more productive. They will be happier. They will be much more successful in their role that they're doing for your business. And that will obviously and only have a positive impact on the output. Whatever way businesses measure their commercial output, that will only have a positive impact. If you've got happy people and people who feel seen as people first rather than employees, they will perform for you. We kind of share some stats in our own research that says, on average, businesses who can create this culture of appreciation where people feel seen for human beings first, those businesses, based on the data that we've got, are 5 to 7% more profitable. So for anyone listening to this who's got tighter budgets, less time, headcount reductions, imagine what you could do with a 5 to 7% bump in the profitability of your organization, where you could reinvest that, where you could do cool stuff in the people space. That starts by getting the people bit right first, and the business results will follow. But we know this. Well, you know this, right? We employ people.
And I feel like sometimes we're banging on that drum and wanting to be heard for it. That statistic is actually amazing. And I'm just thinking, I cannot wait for people to hear that, because having a people first approach within your business can truly change the game. Employees are not just there for a paycheck. Yes, it's incredibly important, but they want to feel seen, valued, and understood. And when we change our mindset and our perspective of that, the results, honestly, are incredible. And people feel more connected. They feel deeper to the organization. And what organization doesn't want that?
Yeah, well, when you say it out loud, it's so obviously common sense, right? But I think it only seems to be a shift in the last few years. Maybe that's because the world's different, right? Maybe we've got different generations, different wants and needs. We've got different technology. We've got different things. COVID has obviously sparked a whole movement in terms of hybrid working and the demands around work-life balance, all that sort of stuff. So there's probably a lot of things that have driven this to the top of the agenda, certainly more loudly on the agenda. But businesses who ignore it at your peril, because
Yeah.
particularly current workforces and actually people coming into the workforce, kind of people who've grown up through the COVID era, um, in terms of, they were in their formative years, teenage years, and are now coming into the, hey, I'm going to start dabbling around for my first job and that sort of stuff. Do they want to work for a company that kind of ignores all of that? Do they want to work for a company that doesn't value them as a person? Or do they want to work for a company that sees them for everything that comes with them, the good, the not so good, the family, the personal life, the work life, gives them choice, gives them uniqueness in terms of things like benefits and well-being? I know who I'd want to work for.
I also think that people see straight through that, though.
Yeah.
They see a lot of performative appreciation strategies rather than really intentional
Yeah.
strategies. And I'm so glad, to be honest. I'm really glad that employers are getting called out for that performative stance, or, looking all shiny and great online, but the reality on the inside is very, very different. With that, though, I think some people struggle to see and understand appreciation beyond a thank you
Yeah.
email. There's so much more that we could do. Do you have any examples of ways that we can show appreciation beyond that good old thank you?
Yeah, well, it's just about thinking about it in the
Yeah.
sense of not saying thank you for what they've done for you, but thanking them for who they are.
Yeah.
So a really simple example, if we were in a meeting and you just presented, I don't know, a spreadsheet or a presentation about a project you're working on, recognition, the thank you for the work that you've done is, hey, that was a great presentation. Thank you for doing that.
Mm.
Actually, appreciation is thank you for the energy that you brought to that. And thank you for the hours that you put in outside of work to bring that to life. Or thank you for the passion that you've got as an individual, which really kind of brought the whole thing off the page or off the screen. So it's just, you could argue it's a subtle change in language, a subtle change in mindset, but that subtlety is really, really key, because all of a sudden I'm seeing Georgia as a human being, not just an employee. I'm appreciating you as a full person, not
Mhm.
just for what you've done. And
It
that makes a difference.
It absolutely does. And it also leaves a really lasting impression. Because if I think of my experience with like senior stakeholders in businesses who have gone that extra mile with appreciation, I felt more connected to them. I felt understood. I felt seen. I felt heard. I worked harder
Yeah.
because of it. And they understood how important that was. And we're slowly seeing change.
Yeah.
Very slowly.
We're getting there.
We're getting there.
Yeah.
We're getting there now. I also think social media is actually helping, because I think it's amplifying the voice of expectations in the workplace and experiences that we can build. The time that we're recording this podcast, last week was Employee Appreciation Day.
It was.
And yes, we have that one day as recognition, but it's not enough to just sit on that one day to say, hey, team, just because I've been prompted, here's my reminder to appreciate you.
Yep.
We should be embedding and baking that into our daily practice.
Of course. Yeah. But look, like anything, it's a habit. So particularly for managers and leaders, I'm sure I know it's one of the trends we'll get into in a second, but if it can feel like another admin task, and one of the things I quite often talk about is, well, if it feels like an admin task, then your why behind the reason you're doing it isn't clear. If you don't see the value in it, then it will just feel like another thing on your to-do list to do. But actually, I'm a fan of stats. I'm a fan of kind of human science and business performance to kind of bring this stuff to life. So it's not just Chris going, on his high horse going, do this, it's much better. There's loads of stats out there that kind of back this up. So for anyone who's in any doubt about whether appreciation adds value to things like productivity, there's this really cool study by Haas. It's a business school out of the US. And we reference this in some of the research that we've done around appreciation at Reward Gateway. And it talks about the difference between productivity at recognition level and appreciation level. So people who are recognized, so that thank you for the job that you did for us, that's a boost, and it's a nice thing for people to feel thanked. And what their research shows is actually people who feel recognized are 23% more productive. So that's pretty decent, right? That's a good productivity boost. If you take it up a level to appreciation, so what I said is not just thank you for that presentation, but thank you for being you and what you bring to it. Their research shows that actually that jumps to 43%. So in times where we are busy, we are striving for more hours in the day when they don't exist, we're not quite sure where to go and where to start. Imagine if all of our workforce were 43% more productive in the stuff that they did. Imagine how happy they would be. Imagine how happy your clients would be, your customers, your CFO. Imagine how happier everyone would be if we got that right. But it's a mindset and it takes deliberate action. It's not accidental, this stuff. It's by design.
And that's where we need our leaders as well to be on board
Yeah.
and be intentional with that. These statistics, Chris, I'm obsessed, love them. And I also think it really paints a picture for our listeners to understand, okay, here is a really important trend that we need to be building habits for. I completely agree. Even with the employment law changes that are happening in 2025, there's a lot of habits we need to instill within ourselves, and appreciation is one of those.
Yeah.
Let's talk about number 3.
Let's do it.
Belonging.
Yeah.
This is, I think we should have prioritized this a few years ago, but it's definitely on the agenda for this year. And it's not, the workplace is no longer just about culture. It is about connection and belonging. How can we start to enable and be intentional about belonging in 2025?
I think it starts with understanding why it's important. So you're right. It's kind of been bubbling around, the DE&I space for a while. So I hear a lot of, and we do it ourselves, we talk about DE&I and B. So the B at the end, which is the belonging side of it. Always important. I think just based on what's going on in the world right now, particularly with our friends over the other side of the Atlantic, where we're kind of rolling back on some of these DE&I initiatives and years of hard work, people are feeling more isolated. The world is more divided than ever before. So if it wasn't on the list in 2024, it's absolutely smashing you in the face in 2025. And the same sort of thing with appreciation. Businesses who choose to ignore DE&I or belonging, do it at your peril, because it's really important to people. We are human and social creatures. It's just built into our DNA. There's this really fascinating book by a guy called Matthew Lieberman, and he talks about us being wired to connect. So we kind of seek belonging. It's kind of ingrained in our kind of DNA. We need to feel like we connect to something. And one of the stats from one of our recent research reports that we did at Reward Gateway was around workplace connection. And this makes me sad, actually. It makes me sad that we're in this space. It said that 1 in 4 UK, so it's a UK report, 1 in 4 UK workers experience frequent loneliness in the workplace. That was a 2024 report. How can we be in mid-2020s and people, 25% of your workforce feel lonely? That's unacceptable. That makes me feel really sad, not just as an HR person, but actually as a human being. That's unacceptable to me.
And it's also thinking, what are we doing about it?
Yeah, exactly.
To think 25%, and I also think there's a lot of post-COVID, a lot of people think, oh, we go back to normal and everything's fine. But it's quite clearly not. And what I don't think has helped is the changing workforce dynamics. We've got hybrid working, remote working, and we're having to adapt. But a lot of companies aren't. They aren't being intentional. If they're a remote company, they're not being remote first. And they're also missing the core people first side of that as well. If anybody is a remote first or a hybrid company, how can we still make sure that we're prioritizing belonging?
Well, because I think there's a difference, and it's a subtle difference, but important one. There's a difference between being lonely, i.e. alone, and loneliness.
Yeah.
So loneliness would kind of fall into the camp of I don't feel like I'm connected. I don't feel like I'm connected to my team, to the values, to the purpose, to the aspirations, whatever's going on. So it's not necessarily about being lonely, because you could argue that everyone who's fully remote, sitting in their office at home, is lonely, right? Because they're kind of sat with them and their cats and whatever else is going on, and they might not see another human being that they work with, maybe ever, depending how the structure of the business is set up. So we're not talking about lonely, we're talking about loneliness. And so whether it's hybrid, whether it's remote, or whether it's 5 days a week in the office, it's about being intentional and being thoughtful. So how do we connect like-minded people who have like-minded experiences or wants and interests so they can connect on a human level? Now, that might be through simple things, really obvious things like team meetings, and making sure people who are not in the office are included with social budgets, all that sort of stuff, right down to what's becoming more and more important, things like employee resource groups, communities in the workplace, those types of things, which don't necessarily have anything to do with work. They just have something to do with humanity. And people can just feel like they're part of it, whether you're a new parent, you like to read, you love movies, whether you're an underrepresented group, whatever it is. Businesses need to create that space for people to feel like they belong, regardless of where they're working.
belonging is such a huge part of the employee experience. I completely agree. And I'm so glad you said about ERG groups. Work is so much more than the day-to-day of coming and actually doing the work. And as a transactional factor, to get the most out of our people, we need to see that holistic experience that we're building. And actually, it was really good then for me to hear about the loneliness, because I think sometimes we can get those a little bit misunderstood, especially from my perspective. So that for me was a really big education. And talking about belonging as an employee experience, how can we create more of a workforce story to get people to be bought into the belonging piece?
Well, I think it goes back to what we were saying earlier about use your employee voice to understand what it is that's important. I was speaking at an event recently and I was interviewing one of our clients, and I speak to a lot of HR people on a regular basis, right? And she said something, I was like, I'd never thought of that. That's amazing.
Ooh, I mean, true.
At her organization, who, by the way, are a regular name on the best employers to work for, they have been on that list for the last 20 years. She said they do an employee census. So not your typical people data, demographics, gender, they've got all that sort of stuff, gender, location, all that sort of stuff. But actually, who has a mortgage versus who rents? Who owns a car versus takes public transport? Who's got kids versus doesn't have kids? And it's all anonymized data, but what they can then use that data to inform them is what they need to do in terms of creating spaces for those groups to connect. So for example, people who they've got a big population of people who were renters. So actually what they've gone out and done is they've sought guidance. They can put in a benefit where people can, understand how to save money better for rent and deposits and that sort of stuff. And they've set up a loan for first-time deposits for renters. But it's things like that where what they've gone out and they've asked their employees is, tell us more about you as a human being, and then let us use that information to shape your experience. And I think that was amazing. I've never heard it done that way before. And I thought, wow, we're not doing more of that. Because actually what you're suddenly creating is really rich, meaningful experience stuff, which your people can buy into. And again, it makes them feel heard and seen because it's relevant to them.
And it's intentional. It actually shows from an employee's perspective that you care.
Yeah, exactly.
That is amazing. I also haven't heard of that. And I also, when you're saying it out loud, again, it's, why are we not doing that?
Yeah.
One size fits all does not fit for everybody. And adapting to everybody's lived experience and current state of their life is really important. And I love that. It leads us really nicely, actually, to number 4, which is make it make sense.
Yeah. I think we're guilty, and I don't know if you've experienced this as well. I think we're guilty over the years, and I put my hands up to say I'm absolutely guilty of this as well, is being distracted by more things. We run projects, we launch benefits, we change policies, we get new intranets, we get new LMSs, whatever it is that's going on in your world. We get really excited about it, we launch it, and then we move on to the next thing. And if you're not in an organization or a people team or have the mindset where that sort of stuff needs to be dynamic, and by that I mean continually under review, then what you end up is just a myriad of things all over the place which kind of don't join up. Have you ever been in a situation where someone says, oh, well, why don't we do this? And you're like, we literally do. Like, literally we do. Have you read the message? Oh, no, I didn't know where to find. So it's just that type of mindset where there's just stuff everywhere and none of it quite makes sense. Have you experienced that yourself?
Oh gosh, yeah, I've absolutely experienced that. And also where there's so many pieces going on where nobody really knows what's a priority, why we're doing it, because it doesn't make sense. There's no intention behind it. There's no focus, no clarity. And there's actually nothing worse than, as an HR professional, when you've spent so much time and energy on a particular project, you go to the team more widely and nobody knows about it.
Yeah, or your engagement survey says we need to do this. You're like, we literally launched last year.
Especially with like benefits, like, oh, I'd love this as a benefit. I'm like, we do.
Yeah, I know.
We have it. It's quite clearly we don't communicate it effectively.
Well, this comes down to, and I've been talking about this for years, so it doesn't feel like a skill for the future anymore, but I talked about it back in the day of a skill for the future of the people profession, is we've got to think like marketing.
Yes.
And we've got to treat our EVP, our employee lifecycle staff, our benefits, whatever it is we've got to treat it like a product. And would our employees buy our product from us if they were a consumer? And if you think like a marketeer, what that allows you to do is have a bit of fun. So you can be quite creative. You can give things a brand. You can create comms plans. You can be quite deliberate with types of messaging and all that. As if you were going into your favorite supermarket, your favorite clothes store, whatever. We have an affiliation to brands. We like to go to places that kind of either jump out at us because it looks cool, feels cool, makes us look cool, feel cool. Treat your HR EVP the same way. Is it a product that your people will buy? If the answer to that is no, then that's not good for business. Why are you selling it? Like, and if it means starting again, start again.
We spoke about this actually. We have an episode on storytelling. And I think a lot of us in HR have fallen into staying in our lane that's a little bit stale and uncreative. We need to get out of that lane very, very quickly and to be more creative. And I love that you just said around actually adopting some of the marketing approaches and perspective, because EVP right now is huge. And there's a lot of brands who are really getting this right. Some still need a little bit of work. Are there any brands that stick out to you in particular that have just got their EVP bob on?
Well, I'm obviously going to talk about my own that I work for in terms of Reward Gateway.
Hey, well, this is also why we're here. So
well, exactly
pretty
that.
well.
The reason I mention Reward Gateway, and obviously tongue in cheek slightly because I'm working for them, but what we managed to blend very well is the link between the reason you want to work for us with when you're actually working for us, it stays the same. And there's other, I've worked many years ago, I worked for Virgin and the same thing. It's kind of very jazzy on the outside to a consumer in terms of like really fun, really cool. And you kind of wonder, is that what it's really like behind the scenes? And the answer to that was yes. And so I think that's where brands go wrong. A lot of big businesses, particularly if they're trying to attract talent, is they might put too much effort and energy, not too much, but they put more of their eggs in the basket of attracting people. And then when people walk through the door, it's a very different thing. And so actually finding that balance is really important. So how can you line up internally what your consumers or your clients think about you externally? That's a really key part.
And when they don't, that's when we face retention issues.
Massively so.
And also that connection piece. A lot of people, speaking more on like my friends as an example, where they go into a workplace and it's one thing that they've been sold, and then the reality when they're in there, you feel quite disappointed.
It's heartbreaking. It's heartbreaking.
And like, how have I been potentially sold down the river with this brand that I was so hopeful for? So yeah, I completely agree. We need to make it make sense.
Yeah, I mean, can you imagine if you go into, I don't know, brand a brand you were really excited about joining, you've quit your previous role, a role perhaps that was quite safe, quite secure, you maybe worked there a while, you build up your friends, all that sort of stuff, and you think, you know, I'm going to take this plunge because it's a dream job. And you go, and on day one, no one knows you're coming, your laptop hasn't arrived, you don't know where to park your car, no one speaks to you, your manager's on a holiday. That can happen, right? So you've got to, what I quite often talk about when I say make it make sense is you need to have a golden thread that runs through all of your EVP from attraction all the way through to leaving, and join the dots. If you leave anything to chance, it's by design again, if you leave anything to chance, things fall over, and actually new starters, new joiners into your organization, they're the most vulnerable, because they're in this perpetual state of, oh God, what's it going to be like on my first day? And if we get that wrong, then we're screwed. We spend a lot of time and money and effort wasted. For them as human beings, for the business, and actually from a brand reputation perspective. So get that bit right.
It absolutely needs to be right. And it can't be a last minute or an afterthought. 82% of new starters will look at companies for their employer brand
Absolutely.
as their decision of whether they're going to join. It's really, when you leave a job, it's a big decision. It's not something you think of lightly. And then when you join a new company, I don't know why, but it feels a little bit awkward.
It is.
So we need to take that awkward piece out of it.
Yeah, make it easy for people. But what I think is quite interesting, back in the day, I mean, it used to be, I generalize slightly when I talk about generations, because I know it is not exactly proven in science or indeed an exact science. But my dad's generation was a job for life. So you had a job, and that was the job you're at. You did your work, you went home, and you went back in the next week. You did it, and you did it, paid the bills. These younger generations coming into the workforce now are much more selective. They're much more educated. There's much more information available about your brand, your practices, your scandal, than ever before. And they are very selective about who they work for. If it doesn't match their purpose, their values, their principles, they'll say, well, I'll just keep on walking and find another business that does. So, and the average tenure is way down than what it used to be. So people are leaving roles quicker than ever before. So if you don't have it right, and all those factors are on top of it, people leaving quicker, jobs to life not a thing, and people being much more selective, then actually the war on talent for you is going to be a very big war that you're not going to win. So you need to get it all right. Otherwise, yeah, it's tricky, really tricky to do business well.
I'm glad you said that because I think a lot of people need to hear. I think a lot of people, we know we're not in the same job for life like it has been historically, but also people are not open to accepting that that's the reality.
Yeah.
And most people, I would say, are in a job for a year to 18 months that I'm seeing quite a lot at the moment and then transitioning on to their next. I think there's a big education, though, to line managers
Yeah.
and leaders on the experience we are creating for our new hires in every single stage of that life cycle, as you said, all the way through to exit.
Yeah.
We want it to be a really positive experience throughout the entire time. Let's go on to the fifth and final point, which is leaders and managers.
I know. Leaders and managers. I don't know if you feel like this or not. I feel like leaders and managers in particular have had a bad time of it fairly recently. It feels like it's, I'm speaking from HR people.
Yeah.
What was the manager's spot? Why's the manager not done it? All valid. I'm sure it is. Why is the manager not done what they said they're going to do? Absolutely. What I've seen recently in the last sort of couple of years is actually more and more and more being placed on the shoulders of managers. Yep, they're paid more. Yep, they know what they're kind of signed up to. But actually, what I think has kind of been lost in that whole thing is they're human beings as well. And all the stuff that's no doubt impacting their employees, and particularly the stuff outside of work, is impacting them as well. And one of the things I think where we've fallen short is, and I've just seen one of these reports fairly recently, even though we're kind of a little bit into 2025 now, is every year since the HR trends lists have existed, that I can remember, management and leadership capability is always in the top 5, always a key priority for HR for the last 15, 20 years. And I question myself to be like, why? Why does it keep appearing near the top of our list year after year after year? Why are we getting it so wrong? Like, why can we not nail down what it means to be a great manager and a great leader? And the conclusion I come to is, firstly, the world has evolved very quickly. We're in a much more overtly and loudly complex place from an employee perspective. They're much more willing to tell us how they're feeling than perhaps ever before. And I think the skills that we perhaps have historically taught managers, particularly new managers, how to have a difficult conversation, how to conduct disciplinaries, how to write a PIP, how to, all valid and important stuff, right? That's basics of just keep the lights on management. But we don't really go near things like empathy, flexibility, self-awareness, emotional intelligence. These are real human skills. And I think that's what our managers, particularly our first line managers, need to know more of in this world that we're in right now. Otherwise, they'll just be like, I've got literally no idea what to do with this person. Like, I've got no idea why this matters. I've got no idea how to deal with their emotion. And when obviously we know what that then leads to.
And 82% of managers are actually considered accidental managers, which means they've not had any training before they've gone into the
You're technically good, so let's just promote you.
More often than not, that's what it is. The best person at the job at the time gets promoted and moved into it. Doesn't mean they're going to be a great people manager. You spoke just then around the different skills that you think could be really valuable for leaders, especially moving forward into 2025. What would you say to any leader who is resistant to that type of skill building because they've got the perception of, I'm not their parent, I'm not there to manage their emotions? What would you say to them?
I think if you're a leader and you're stuck in traditional leadership, kind of either hierarchical or command and control or whatever it might be, then if you don't get with the time, you'll very quickly get found out and as being disingenuous, non-authentic, all the stuff that matters to employees now. But what I will say to leaders is, and if I could be amateur psychologist in me, I remember experiencing this years ago when I ran a leadership program at a different organization. And it was exactly that. It was a leader who'd been around 20 years, say 20 years, and kind of, I don't need to do this. I've been managing and leading people my whole adult life. Who are you to tell me how to do it differently? And actually unpacking that a little bit with that person and doing like a little bit of coaching and that sort of stuff. that resistance to change wasn't actually about resistance to change. It was fear of the unknown. It was fear of adapting their style at their stage of career when they've always done it the way they've always done it and it's been successful because that's the way businesses were always run. Now you're asking me to be different to who I am, and I don't know how to do it. And that frightens me. It frightens me to open myself up and be vulnerable to do something different because what if I can't do it? What if I look stupid? What if they don't buy into me? So I'd like to think, I try and give people the benefit of the doubt. I try and think most people, including leaders, turn up to work every day and want to do a good job, right? They want to do a good job. They're not intentionally, most people, they're not intentionally turning up to annoy someone, upset someone, make someone feel unvalued. So let's work on that benefit of the doubt mindset to begin with. So if that's true, then we have to then think, well, what is the blocker? If it is fear of vulnerability, then let's think about how we work with those people rather than going, they're never going to change. We need to think about how do we work with them to gradually change so they can see the value in changing or adapting or building a new type of skill where they don't look stupid, feel silly, they have a safe place to practice and fail. And because I think most leaders probably would want to evolve, they just don't know how to do it or they're frightened to do it.
Nobody wakes up wanting to be difficult. Nobody does. I've actually never met someone who woke up and go, you know what, this is me for today. I love how you just said it's around asking great questions to understand and dig deeper and not taking that surface level response, going beyond that. And fear is a huge part of that. And I'm really glad that he was able to identify that. And a lot of people can really resonate with that in terms of this is new. Generations, going back to that, I've not had a younger generation. I don't know how they're going to respond. What if they don't respond in the way that I'm used to? And how do I overcome that?
Yeah.
We need to get better at asking questions.
Yeah, we do. But what's really interesting, I think there's a kind of a cliff edge moment, not too distant in the future, because those kind of traditional leadership styles that we just talked about, 5, 10, 15 years down the line, those people are going to be retiring,
Yes.
exiting corporate life, exiting business. And actually the people replacing them are this generation who are digitally savvy, who are more emotionally aware, who are more willing to tell you how they're feeling, who do demand more from a humanity perspective. And all of a sudden they'll be the ones controlling the strategies, the budgets, the direction it travels. So I think there is a real shift coming in tops of businesses from that type of thing. It's just a little bit further down the line. So I guess the way I think about that from an HR perspective is let's get on top of that now.
Yeah.
Like in terms of your leadership development, in terms of your management development, let's understand that that's a time thing and that's not going to stop for anyone. It's inevitable that's going to happen. So rather than being reactive when it happens and go, oh, right, like what do we do now? Let's get proactive with our leaders of the future with all of those skills we've just talked about, because that'll stand them in good stead for the alpha generation, which is, 5 to 10 years away from joining the workforce and beyond. And so I think it's a really interesting thing to think about. And that's one of the things we don't do at HR very well, and myself included, is we tend to be quite reactive rather than proactive. That's a proactive thing that we can do now to help our leaders in the future be ready.
And there's such a core thread throughout all the 5 points around being more proactive. We know that 2025 is a big year of change for us in the profession. And we do need to be more proactive. We need to be building those better habits, because if we don't, we're doing ourselves a disservice. We've been so reactive our entire time. And this is where we can really elevate and add value as a function.
Yeah.
I have one last question.
Okay.
Looking back on your career, what's one piece of advice that you would give your younger self?
That's an easy one and an interesting one, because it's something I've thought about fairly recently with some of the work I'm doing just on kind of men's health and my own health. One of the things I was very wary of as a young man going into business and corporate life was not showing the true version of me. I was very guarded against that and almost a little bit worried to let people too close to see who I'm really like as a person. And that's been a journey that I've been on. But if I was looking back at my kind of 20-year-old self, I'd say, actually, you are enough. And actually what you bring and the skills that you have and the purpose that you've got is going to add value. So trust that. Don't fall into the traps that might be set in terms of society, historical views, and learning your behaviors from bad leaders or bad managers that are around you when you've never done it before. trust your principles, be grounded in your own values, and know that what you're going to bring to whatever you're doing is enough and valuable.
There's so much power in what you just said there as well, and so much fullness in how we can be ourselves and should be ourselves at work. Thank you so much for sharing that, Chris. I really appreciate your time on this podcast and so much value. The 5 trends are going to change our perspective on this year, and I'm so glad that we spoke about it.
It's great to be here.
Thank you so much. I really appreciate it, and see you next time.
See you next time.
Like this episode? Click here for more HR talk. And if you're just catching up, check out our previous episodes right here.